Welcome to USA Global TV and Radio, where our mission is to provide education, entertainment, hope, and inspiration. USA Global TV and Radio connects you with experts and audiences all around the world every single day to help you succeed in business and to live a richer life. Visit us at usaglobaltv.com to learn about career and life-changing training and mentoring programs like the Listening Mentor. Subscribe to our newsletter to stay informed about our special programs and offers. Discover how you can become a guest on one of our shows or a host or producer of a USA Global TV and Radio show of your very own. That's USA Global TV and Radio, where the doctor is always in.
Hello and welcome home to USA Global TV and Radio. I'm Dr. JACALYN KERBECK, and our show today is Your Story, Your Grief, Your Journey. Let's welcome our star, Doug Lawrence. Come on out, Doug. It's so good to see you.
It's good to see you too, and hello to our listening and viewing audience across the world. And thank you so much for taking the time to be with us today as we talk about your story, your grief, your journey, and what does that all mean from a anger and frustration aspect. So pretty exciting show today, because that actually hits home in a number of different places. I know for me it does.
Yeah, absolutely, Doug. And before we dive into our topic, you've been helping people all over the world. You are an entrepreneur. You're also an international best-selling author. You are a certified competent mentor. Tell us about how you help people, and typically, who are those people?
Oh my goodness. How I basically help people is I use mentoring process and concepts to be able to develop a trusted relationship. And from there, I work on identifying what some of the issues are, what the root causes are of those issues. And then together with that individual, we figure out a strategy of some sort that we're going to be able to move forward to, as part of their healing journey, is to get them to take ownership and accountability for moving forward, so that they are also accountable and own the outcomes that are going to take place. And I am doing that from a mentoring process and concepts. I'm doing it internationally. In fact, I just recently got matched with a new young entrepreneur as part of the Sir Richard Branson's program in the Caribbean. So I'm now working with a young lady who we've had one meeting. We have one coming up this Friday. And part of that will be going through, determining what are what's the criteria around our relationship? What is it going to be? What are the expectations and all of those things? And so those are just some of the things that, that I go through with somebody that I'm working with. And who, when I take a look at who do I focus my attention on to try and help, it's basically, there's no borders. That's the best way to describe it. There's no borders. And whoever needs help, I'm more than willing to, help you on your healing journey, whether it be just from a mentoring perspective, so you're trying to move forward in your company, in your organization, or whether it's because of your challenges that you're experiencing with mental health, mental well-being, and grief, which is becoming more and more I'll use this word or words, hot topic, that people are starting to become more aware, more cognizant of the impact that grief can have on all of us, for that matter, and the fact that it too is continuing to grow and become more and more prevalent in society today.
Thanks so much, Doug. I think when we break down grief, the word that comes to me immediately is loss. And then the next word, I'm not sure which is more powerful, but pain. loss of something and the pain that comes with it. And I don't think either one of them inspires a smile on my face or joy inside my body. And these are subjects that people didn't want to discuss for so long, just like suicide awareness, domestic violence, things that people don't like to talk about yet, but it's so important. Backstage before the show started, we were talking about scenarios that relate to grief, but the person or persons may still be here and we may be grieving while they're still alive. Can you share a little bit of insight of how this is possible?
Well, what basically takes place is that you have a loved one, say for example, and I'll my father was ill and was dying, and there's a it's a quite a story to tell about all the different pieces to that particular puzzle. But in some way, shape, or form, I had started to grieve his loss, even though he was still with us here on Earth. And he was, you know, um, he had his second wife, who is an absolute angel for hanging in there as long as she did. He had her as, trying to make his last time, his time left here on Earth, as meaningful and as comfortable as possible. And from my perspective, there was the whole issue of having to deal with the broken relationship between he and I. But for me, it was not wanting to see him suffer. And so I'm grieving in some way, shape, or form. I was grieving the imminent result being that he was going to pass, and I was grieving, kind of that I'm ahead of the game, so to speak. But what's also, I think, that a lot of us experience is the fact that we know that a loved one is ill, terminally ill, and we know that they are going to pass, and we want it to end because we don't want them to go through any more suffering and pain, and it becomes frustrating for us when we can't force that outcome that we know is the ultimate outcome that we actually want. And so, I can think of a number of different situations where that was much the same sort of thing, is that, you just, like I think of my mom when, she went through, she was in palliative care and eventually got to a time point where, she was getting medication to just take care of the pain. And you kind of go, gosh, there's somebody that's lived a life of 79 or 80 years of age. And do they really have to pass with so much pain and suffering, when it would be nice if, in order to quell that, if they could, just go to sleep and not wake up. And I know for some folks that's harsh, but that's a reality.
Absolutely. And Doug, there's several other examples that we could cite, just a couple I'll put out there. If someone has been in a relationship that is just not working, it could be a marriage, it could be living together for a number of years, and there's that frustration that they just can't make it work, and they want it to work, but they're only one of two people, and both people are not really trying. And so then there's that frustration and the anger that it's ultimately going to come to an end. And yet here they are, here's the other person they met whenever it was, they had all these things in common, they fell in love, and now it's a death that is taking place, and it's just dragging on and on. We all know people like this in relationships that it doesn't work, but yet they don't part ways, and it's a slow death that's there all the time.
Well, and here's an interesting curveball that I stumbled across last little while here, but is the aspect that we sometimes confuse frustration and anger we get them confused, where what we really want to be able to do is sort of see the separation between the two of, anger's here and frustration's here. And if I get to a certain amount of frustration, does that then shift itself into anger? And if it does, are either one of those two emotions, for lack of a better choice of words, are either one of those, are they something we actually can manage? And I'll give you an example is that what I say to people, especially people I'm mentoring, is that you can manage stress or stress can manage you. And so then when I take a look at that and I look at it from the aspect of frustration versus anger, can I manage my frustrations? Can I manage my anger? And is there a segue between the two? And if so, can I manage that segue so that it isn't as dramatic, traumatic, whichever word you want to use, in that particular situation? So it becomes, I remember I was working with somebody and we were able to determine that it wasn't really anger that they were experiencing. They were experiencing the frustration, and it had to do with different situations that were taking place, both personally and professionally. And it was trying to get us to a place where we could park maybe one of those, either the frustration part or the anger part. And then as I think back to that particular event, it was that we focused on the frustration part. Anger anger was something that you could take home from the office. Frustration, hopefully we could get it to a point where you would just leave it at the office. And the story I shared was, I remember a motivational speaker, God bless her, she's just a fabulous lady, and she always tells the story about, leaving work and frustrated and coming home and pulling into the garage and getting set to go into the house and not wanting to bring all that negative energy into the house. And so would stay in the garage with, her hand on the doorknob until she felt comfortable that she had gotten rid of all of that negative energy, that toxicity, because she didn't want to bring it home from the office, because the first thing that would happen is she would end up lashing out at, either her, husband or children or whoever. And because she had to get rid of that, there had to be that release. And that was the way she had to do it.
Thanks for sharing that story with us, Doug. I'm wondering, in that story as well as in general, how much of frustration is potentially tied to a lack of control, wanting to control a situation and we can't?
I would say that that's a good point. I would say that there's probably, I think that we have a better chance of controlling our frustration than we do our anger. When our anger gets away on us, in some sad as it may be, it has to play itself out. And at some stage, you need to be accountable for the outcomes of anger getting away on you. I'm frustrated I don't want to say on a daily basis because that doesn't sound good, but I'm frustrated. Say, for example, I'll use weekends and everybody knows that I hate weekends with a passion in most cases because I'm usually by myself. And that was always the time Deborah and I spent together doing errands and odds and ends like that. And I don't have that. And I get frustrated, I think more so with myself, because I should be able to manage that better than what I do. Like, and I don't want to downplay this where I say, just manage it. Just do something with it so that it's not as much of an issue. But it's, it's a combination of things. It's the loneliness, and then it's also the disconnect from family and friends who may or may not spend any time or as much time. And the frustration is also there, where you don't want to become a burden to everybody else, where, they get to a point where they go, oh my gosh, it's the weekend again, and we've got to entertain them for another couple of days. You don't want to become that burden, but at the same time, you're kind of looking for, what is it that we can do that's going to help me with my frustration that I'm dealing with. And it's also tied to my healing journey, is being alone for that much time doesn't really do much good for the healing process that we all need to go through as part of, our dealing with the loss of a loved one, the grief that goes along with that.
Thanks so much, as always, for being so honest and transparent about what you're dealing with. And when you said you don't want to say you're frustrated every day, I'm going to say that I am frustrated every day. So I actually think I'm doing something powerful with it, which is I take it and put it into my workouts. I don't know if that's a good thing or not, because maybe it elevates your heart rate even more. I'm not sure. But I also feel like when it comes to our health, there can be frustrations there, the health of our loved ones. We talk a lot on this platform about dementia, for example, and I know that there's a lot of frustration in that when you look at someone whom you respect and you love and you've been caring for, most of your life, and then all of a sudden they're not that person anymore, and it's not their fault. It's not their fault. But yet, to watch the transformation, it is so frustrating, and that frustration can lead to anger. And then there's nothing to do with it. You can't do anything with that anger. It's not going to change the situation. And that's true for many situations, that no matter how angry we are about something, it doesn't change what the outcome is or is going to be.
And that's an interesting thing to think about, and the parallel between, say, dementia, anger, and frustration. And in some of the preliminary research that I had done when I was doing some, actually the next book was, I think it was the next book I'm putting out, that it was, and I saw this in my own family, actually, in my in-laws, where what would happen is the stress of the relationship between, grandpa and grandma, or mom and dad, whichever terminology you want to use, but was the aspect of anger and stress acted as a enhancer for the progression of dementia in an individual. So, us getting frustrated or angry with somebody who has got dementia, all we're doing, if we raise their sense of feeling or well-being to a point where, they start to become, they don't know how come I'm not my best self, and nobody seems to understand, nobody really cares. Or if people do care, it's hard for them to sort of sort that out. But is the thing that I guess the point I'm trying to make is that we need to be so careful, especially with dementia, is that we can actually be the catalyst that can speed up the progression of dementia within someone. And it's also interesting. I did, when my mom had cancer, I talked to her every day, and I said, she would say, well, I think, it's my time has come and all that. And I said, we're not talking that way. We're not going to talk in anything negative whatsoever. Throw that out with the bathwater. And we're going to focus every day that we chat, we focus on the positive. What was something good that happened today? And what was something that maybe we need to take a look at? Maybe we need to change some of our behaviors in that, but we want to stay focused on the positive, because it's the negative that will speed up the growth of the cancer in your body. And, you know, whether I want to take credit or not, I know that she lived, you know, for a bit longer than what I had anticipated that she would. And she lasted, I think it was diagnosed in October, and she made it to actually over a year. Yeah, it would be over a year that she was able to hang in there. And actually, the good news story was she got to see her granddaughter get married, and that's a whole nother side issue, or another, not an issue, but another story for another day. But was so she did, you know, she was able to, and that was part of the nurturing of her healing journey. To that extent was the fact that I had her focus on going to her granddaughter's wedding and actually seeing her get married, and that's what it took.
That's great, the way you provided that support and the fact that she was able to live longer and experience those things. It brings to mind something that we've discussed before on this show, as well as others, that there's so many subjects that are not taught in mainstream schools. And I feel like this is one of those topics, because I know for me, when I was getting to be a certain age, I was handed a book about the birds and bees, and oh, read this book, whatever's going to happen. And there's certain things that we expect, that we come to know are going to happen. And while we know that we're going to be here for a certain amount of time, at least in this life, which I believe is the only life, but many people believe something else, we're not actually taught how to prepare emotionally for these things. And so what happens is everything's fine, everybody's doing great, then all of a sudden somebody doesn't feel well, or there's a diagnosis, or a person is just no longer there, and wow, our whole lives are upside down. And now we have to seek out someone like yourself to help us. What if we could seek you out before it happens, so that we could prepare ourselves? What if we were taught this in school, that at some point your loved ones will pass away, and this is how you can prepare, this is what you could do while they're still alive, how you could spend the best quality time, maybe learn how to forgive, maybe learn how to apologize. All of these things I feel could make for a much more celebrated process while we're on this earth. What do you think?
No, I agree, you know, and I think it's the aspect of forgiveness is the one that certainly jumped out for me. Was I know, even personally, I know, you know, with my father, there was the missing elements of forgiveness, and that on both sides, I guess, you know. And it's only recently that I've been able to get to that place where, you know, forgiveness has become something we strive for. So there's lots of different aspects of that. But I agree, we don't always teach things that are of benefit. Certainly from a human perspective, we don't teach. I think of some of the speaking engagements that I've done where we ended up talking about some of this very same stuff. We talked about grief and how, you know, people are sort of stuck in their closet, so to speak, and are afraid to come out, because if they show that they've got emotions, or, you know, stuff like that, that is a sign of, in their mind, a sign of weakness, that they don't want to go there. They would rather stay in the closet and kind of deal with things that way. So, you know, that, I guess that's a personal decision. I just know from my own perspective that the more that I share, the better I feel. The more that I share, the more of a therapeutic nature that conversation is for me to be able to move forward. And, you know, when you take a look at, you know, the anger and the frustration part of it all, is I can manage that frustration, I can manage that anger simply by being in a a place of caring. So caring and forgiveness. And if I can get myself to that place, then, it's going to help me make a difference for myself, but also for those who I reach out to help through their journey, and help them get to a place where they feel more comfortable with who they are as a person.
Yeah, I definitely agree with what you shared there. And I think it would be helpful to our audience if you could explain what are the physical signs of frustration versus anger, or what is the feeling we have in our body? Is there something that someone can see? They look across and go, "Oh, she's really angry," or "He's really frustrated." Or can we identify that in someone else?
Um, you can. It definitely it takes practice, I guess, is the best way. How I separate the two is when I'm angry, I am more inclined to be. Um, I, I'm probably going to be not necessarily physical, but very vocal verbally, and it's an external emotion that I have, or an external reaction that I have to something. Where if I'm frustrated, I have a tendency to keep that inside more, and and I may be the sort that would end up saying, doesn't matter what I say or do, it's not going to change the outcome. So, versus if I'm angry, I'm going to become more vocal. What do you mean if I do this, that nothing's going to change? That's hogwash. I think we should be doing that. Why aren't we doing that, by the way? And isn't their life precious to you? Because you're certainly telling me that it's not, versus, the frustrated is, I'm sorry you feel that way, but I think, that we could probably make a difference here, or do, kind of change it up. And it's the mentoring part of me that keeps sliding into the conversation, because I know that, whether it's anger or frustration, I know that if we manage it, we're going to be able to move forward and be able to do some good things.
Definitely, definitely. Thank you, Doug. I'm also wondering if we think about perspective. Let's use grief in a situation in a corporate career, for example. An opportunity that you didn't get to take advantage of was you were passed by for promotion, and you're grieving the fact that, wow, I never even had that opportunity. But others are perceiving what you went through in a different way. Well, he never did the work he was supposed to do. He didn't show up to the meetings on time. That's why he or she didn't get that opportunity. And so I guess my question is that when we're in a situation with someone who is frustrated and has a perspective that we don't agree with per se, we see the situation in a different way. Let's move it to a health situation. An individual is diagnosed with something. One family member is more of the compassionate, sympathetic, and the other is more about the finances. We need to get the finances in order. We need to get the will in order, whatever it might be. How do we interact and respect other perspectives, knowing there's a certain level of frustration, knowing that certain people might have this deep-seated anger that then starts to spill into everything else in other conversations?
So for the big thing for me is communicate, 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 and be willing to do so um, quite openly and quite freely. And because as you were sort of outlining the situation or the scenario, I was thinking, that a lot of that stuff would be, for me, I would simply revert back to my mentoring process and concepts, and I would pose questions that would get us both thinking. It can be as simple as, gee, I don't know. When I think of what you just finished saying, I don't know if I totally grasp the situation as clearly as what you obviously have? And can you break it down a little bit for me? And I would use that. So I would communicate, but I would use questions to be able to get us both to a place where we're thinking, and actually thinking more so together than, you know, you versus me, so to speak. So that's the approach that I would take. And I know that, um, I think back to when my mom passed and some of the tough conversations and that we had, because we didn't at that stage really have that clear of a roadmap. That, you mentioned a will and stuff. I think they had a rudimentary approach to a will. Definitely not what I would see as being something that is suitable, excuse me, right now. Certainly in this era. Um, so it would be when, when I think back to the aspect of, trying to have those conversations to get to where you think we need to get to, and to make sure that everybody that's a part of that journey has the opportunity to voice their concerns. And that, you're kind of the mediator, if you want to use that term, to get everybody through that whole process. Because I know I think of, some of the things that took place, and what we did when, with both my parents for that matter. Communication would have solved a lot of that.
Yeah, communication is so important. And Doug, what about when we have these conversations, we are communicating, and all of a sudden it's an aha moment. It's like, oh, I don't feel the same way that you feel. And now something's going to change. And that can also bring frustration. And what I mean by that is, many times if people are in a relationship and they can't see it, maybe they feel it, but others are like, yeah, that's such a dysfunctional relationship. I don't know how they stay together. And then they get counseling, or they go to a therapist, they meet with a mentor or coach, and they realize they're not on the same page. They spent all this time together, and a lot of it might have been frustrating, and now they realize, wow, I don't see things the way that you do, and I'm not going to change. Sometimes that finalization of a relationship in that regard, that can lead to a lot of frustration and anger, because you put in the years, you put in the time, you build something together, you have a family together, and now you're just not on the same page, but you never really took the time to discuss it. You could have saved yourself a lot of aggravation along the way.
Yeah, and for me, I always take it back to, I what I'm hearing you say is that we're kind of at opposite ends of the spectrum as far as our next steps. And what I'm interested in hearing is, what do we need to do in order to close that gap, so that we're not that as far apart as what we appear to be today. And I think if you do it in that collaborative sort of style or approach, that you you don't make it adversarial. So you don't, I don't really care what you say or want to do. This is the way it should be done, and we should agree to move forward and do it my way. That's probably not going to work well. In fact, that's probably going to work and push you in the opposite direction of where you are right now. And I don't think you want to go there.
Yeah, good point. And when I brought up the question, I wasn't actually thinking of anything. Nothing came to mind. But since then, something has. I remember when I was married, we went to, I think, 5 marriage counselors. And the last one looked at me after we'd gone a number of times, and she said, "Have you had enough yet?" And I just looked at her because I wasn't really sure what she meant. And I said, "Had enough of what?" And she said, "Had enough of coming here and talking about the situation that clearly doesn't make you happy." And I was like, wow, like this weight had been lifted off. And at the same time, I thought she saw it from day one. Why couldn't I see it? Why did I have blinders on? But my answer was a resounding yes. And a lot of that pain sort of lifted away. But at the same point, it was a loss. And I feel that each of us in our time are losing, in some regards, something that we thought was a priority, that we made a commitment to honor and keep. And then for whatever reason, it didn't work out because we made different choices, because we grew apart. But there is that frustration and anger that we then have to deal with.
Well, and grief as well.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe to simplify things is we have that big ugly beast who we'll call grief, and feeding into that big ugly beast is the aspect of frustration, the aspect of anger. All of those things are feeding into that big ugly beast that we know, grief. And what we need to be able to, part of this show is all about, how do you deal with grief, and what are the different aspects of it, and how can I learn from someone else's lived experience, and all of those things. And if we think of, like I said, if we think of grief as the big ugly monster, and anger and frustration are feed into that, then we know that we need to take a couple steps back, and we need to sort of say, one of the things I teach people when I'm mentoring is I have what I call the pausing technique. And the pausing technique is that you are in a conversation with somebody, or going to be in a conversation with somebody, and you all of a sudden you're going to say something that the light comes on for you, and you go, oh my goodness, I wonder, I know that if I were to say what I'm thinking right now, that I would definitely take it the wrong way. And so if you get to that stage, the pausing technique is pause, ask yourself the question, would I like it if somebody were to say this to me? And if the answer is yes, then don't say it, reframe it, rephrase it, go through that process. But if it's, and then repeat or say the new statement or whatever you want to have, but always be mindful of the fact that I may sometimes need to pause and go, just a minute, maybe this isn't the right thing to say, and maybe I need to reword it, or maybe reframe it, or maybe I need to have a different conversation. Maybe I need to use crucial conversations and sort of say, I think we need to take a break from this conversation, and let's get back together in a couple of hours and continue our discussion at that time point. And so creating, using those techniques to be able to create us getting closer to creating that safe place for us to have that meaningful conversation.
I love that technique that you're talking about. I'd love to have you share, just as we come to the end. I've seen this many times in coaching people on how to listen, is when there's that space, that pause. For example, let's take some time, let's get back together in 2 hours. One party might feel very vulnerable. They might feel afraid that in that silence, in that pause, that the other person might have this epiphany moment and say, oh, I don't really care about you, or I don't want you, or now that this is out in the open, I'm seeing you in a different way. And so that the vulnerable person wants to just keep talking. They don't want to take any of that space because of that fear factor. What are your thoughts about that?
That's certainly something that can, in fact, take place, is the fear factor. But I guess I look at it from the aspect of if I'm in that conversation and I'm the sort of person that, wants to just keep talking because I feel as though that if I talk, I'm creating a place of safety for myself, because I'm not giving them the opportunity to share their thoughts and what they're looking for potential outcomes. And so it's a matter of, when you're having those conversations, is to be able to ask the question, I get a sense or a feeling that you want us to keep continuing our dialogue. Is that, am I getting the right sense or the right feeling? And build on that and go from there. And at the end of it, I think that sometimes you may have to force just a little bit to be able to say, I personally need a little bit of time to digest what we've talked about so far. So if it's okay with you, I would like to be able to take a short break and let's get back together again in an hour or 2 hours, and we'll continue our conversation, which I know is going to be really, really meaningful for both of us. And leave it at that.
Yeah, and what comes up for me when you're sharing that, Doug, is a level of respect. The respect to give the other person the time they need to think about it. And if they come back and they realize that you're not on the same page, or maybe they don't want you anymore, then that's a gift, because you didn't take any more time being frustrated and angry, not knowing what's going on.
Yeah, I agree. I agree with that.
Yeah. So I've really enjoyed sharing this space with you today. We have another show coming up, as you know. So, Doug, you are available to help people. Do you have a certain amount of time that is available? I know you're really busy. Are you taking on new clients?
Well, two things. And the most important is I'll never leave you on the island by yourself. That's all I think. To answer your question specifically, I will never leave you on the island by yourself. So if you do need to reach out and you're not sure and you just want to have call it a conversation of discovery, whether, we can do some things together or not, we can certainly do that. And we can, you can get at me if you want to use that through my website, through www.talentc.ca, or just an email message to doug.lawrence@talentc.ca, and we can start the conversation and see where it goes. But just remember, I'll never leave you on the island by yourself.
I love that. That sounds like it could be a TV series. Look into that, Doug.
Yeah.
Doug and I will be right back with stories of hope, inspiration, and overcoming adversity. So wherever you are watching us, please stay there. We'll be back in less than 15 minutes. Thank you so much. Bye, Doug. Thank you.
Bye. Take care.
Everyone. Bye.